Aggressive Russia launched a war in Ukraine in 2022, during which Russian troops committed numerous war crimes, incited by Russian imperialism. This video opens the series exploring the history of imperialism in modern Russia. In the first part, we explore the background of the Russian Revolution of 1917. At the beginning of the 20th century, Russia was a powerful military empire with a large army, navy, and a developed military industry. However, its industrial base lagged behind Western Europe and the United States. The national policy of the multinational Russian Empire was based on compulsory Russification. Meanwhile, ethnic Russians, also known as Great Russians, made up about 44% of the population according to the 1897 census, making them the largest group but not an absolute majority. The rise of nationalism and separatism within the Russian Empire could have sparked an internal crisis, which was a consequence of the very nature of Russian colonialism. The annexed territories bordered the parent state, making any uprising for independence a threat to the empire. Approximately three-quarters of the empire's population remained illiterate, and the urban population made up only about 15%. Since the 15th century, Russia's autocratic system has depended on several key principles. Firstly, a highly centralized state authority concentrated decision-making in the hands of the Tsar and bureaucracy. Secondly, political power was closely linked to the idea of divine legitimacy. Thirdly, the Tsar was perceived by subjects as a semi-sacred figure whose authority could not be questioned. Fourthly, administrative power generally took precedence over legal institutions. However, an overly centralized state suppresses private initiative, which, in turn, hampers the country's economic development. In the 19th century, during a period of rapid economic growth, the over-centralization of the Russian Empire caused it to lag behind advanced industrial countries. The evident backwardness of the Russian Empire was demonstrated by its defeat in 1905 during the Russo-Japanese War. This defeat was more humiliating than the Russian Empire's loss in the Crimean War, which lasted from 1853 to 1856. In the war with Japan, the Russian Empire's enemy was not a coalition of European countries, as in the Crimean War, but a small country in the Far East with a dynamically developing economy. As a result of the defeat, Russia was forced to hand over to Japan the southern part of the Russian island of Sakhalin and Russian territory on the Liaodong Peninsula. Any attempts at reform weakened the imperial principles of Russian autocracy, which in turn contributed to the emergence of a crisis. The consequence of the application of the principle of the rule of law, necessary for normal economic development, could have led to a weakening of the imperial principle of vertical control of authority. Public discussion of the issues facing the Russian Empire ultimately evolved into criticism of the government, thereby undermining the imperial principle of sacredness. The liberalization of colonial policy aided the rise of nationalism and separatism. Following the Russian Empire's humiliating defeat in the Russo-Japanese War, the Russian government embarked on a series of poorly planned reforms that led to the Russian Revolution of 1905. The autocratic government effectively suppressed the revolution through violence and political maneuvering, but the empire's issues persisted. By February 1917, the empire's crisis was worsened by wartime fatigue and widespread corruption. The influence of Grigory Rasputin, who was close to the imperial family, eroded public trust in the monarchy. His involvement in ministerial appointments and the scandals surrounding him damaged the prestige of the throne. Its subjects no longer perceived the Tsar's family as semi-sacred figures. The Tsar's decision to accept the title of Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Army was also a mistake, as the commander-in-chief bears personal responsibility for the numerous defeats and failures of the Russian army at the front. In an excessively centralized empire, all governing of the country was concentrated in the capital. The absence of the Tsar, who was at the Supreme Commander-in-Chief's headquarters in Mogilev during the February 1917 crisis in the capital, had negative consequences. Because the capital, Petrograd, modern St. Petersburg, was a central railway hub, 300,000 military personnel of the General Command Reserve were stationed there. The soldiers' idleness, the small number of officers, war weariness, and reluctance to go to the front made this troop mass critically dangerous. The Russian monarchy fell due to a combination of mass protests, strikes, and a military mutiny. By the beginning of 1916, there were numerous signs that the economy was collapsing under the increased pressure of military demand. The main problems were food shortages and inflation, which led to price increases. The food shortage was especially acute in Petrograd. In 1916, an anti-Russian uprising by the native people of Russian Turkestan erupted, known as the Central Asian Revolt or the Semireki Revolt, which was triggered by the conscription of Muslims into the Russian army. Historians estimate that around 270,000 Central Asians, including Cossacks, Kyrgyz, Tajiks, Turkmens, and Uzbeks, perished due to punitive actions by the Russian army, disease, and starvation. By February 25, 1917, virtually all industrial enterprises in Petrograd were closed, along with many retail and service businesses. Demonstrations took to the streets demanding food. The Tsar ordered the army to suppress the unrest, which served as a trigger for military mutinies. Many officers were shot or went into hiding, and the Petrograd garrison was unable to suppress the protests. On the 26th of February 1917, after receiving reports of a crisis in Petrograd, the Tsar ordered the dissolution of the parliament, called the State Duma. The next day, the State Duma, obedient to the Tsar, dissolved itself, but its most radical deputies formed a provisional committee. At the same time, a self-proclaimed Petrograd Council of Workers and Soldiers deputies was created. Thus, two competing centers of authority were created. On the 2nd of March 1917, the Tsar abdicated the throne in favor of his brother Mikhail. The next day, Michael also abdicated the throne. This political act ended the autocratic monarchy in the Russian Empire. In the following video, we examine the unsuccessful attempt to establish freedom in the Russian Empire.